Hello, I talked about keeping a visual diary in my last video, which I'll link above. I'm going to do it to document a lot of plants that are growing throughout the seasons. I'm going to try and do a whole year. And I just thought I'd show you a few different ways you can do this. I did mention in the last video that I'm not very good at working in standard sketchbooks because I don't tend to keep them up. And here is an example. So this is a book that I was documenting my cutting garden in, and some of the pages are kind of fully finished, as this one. And this wasn't just about the plants, it was about all the tools I was using and how I made it, which is a fun way of doing things, because even sort of quite humble things like these secateurs are sort of quite graphic, aren't they? I think I even traced round to get the initial shapes. And I've used, these are just from magazines or newspapers, you know, they call them ransom letters. And then I did a few annotations as well. So I put, these are Japanese secateurs made by Okatsuni. I like them because they are small, so they fit in my hand well. Plus they stay sharp, even though I don't look after them very well, which is true. This is, I think, my second pair. One pair ended up in the compost heap and I found it months later. And yeah, and several of the pages I'm really happy with. This one was just lots of plant names and using the labels. And I did lots of sort of insertions and things. This one's quite fun because I drew the gate on a bit of tracing paper, and then that takes you into the cutting garden. And I got quite a few pages done, but as you can see, there are lots of empty pages. Even though I did lots of prep and I added bits and did some stitching and did some paint, it makes me want to go back to it now that I'm looking at it. And I will link the video because I do think that's quite helpful of a way, if you are going to use a sketchbook, that you can do a bit to it first, add some colour, some windows, some stitching if you want, and it makes it kind of a little bit, it's not quite so scary, you know, the sort of white page with nothing on it. And I've started putting some photographs in. So I've worked in this, but I haven't finished it. And but as I say, I think I'm going to go back to it because I think some of the things I've done I really like. There's some of the photos that I kept, and that's a good way. If you're not very confident of your drawing, you can always add photographs, and you can change the photographs as well. What I'll do is I'll put my playlist at the end. Nearly everything I'm going to show you today, there is an individual video that explains how I made them, so I'll put that in a playlist at the end and you might want to look at those. So that's using a standard sketchbook, but I've sort of made it, I don't know why I started from the back. There must have been some reason. Anyway, but that's using a standard sketchbook and a way of making it a little bit less intimidating. But I've got lots of other examples, and this is probably the oldest one I've done. And this was, I wanted to find a wild flower blooming through the whole winter. I think this wasn't a lockdown project. It sounds like a lockdown project. I think it was older than that, actually. I think it was before that. And as you can see, I did these on individual pages of watercolour, and I just did simple sketches. And at the end, I made them into an accordion book just by putting tape. Now this one, and then making covers for it. And then I didn't even bother putting anything on the other side because I sort of quite like the minimal nature of that. I think it's got a sort of slight Japanese feel, especially things like that, the catkin. So that's a way you can do it. You can use standard size pieces of paper and do your pictures or your printing or your photographs, annotate it however you want or not at all, like I've done here. I could sort of add the plant names on. And then at the end, when you've got them all, you can bind them. And there's several different ways you can do that. I made this into an accordion book so it could stand up and be on... No, it's a good way. You can put that on a mantelpiece or a shelf or something, and then that's quite decorative. Other ways that you can bind loose papers are, I've got a couple here. They're not really the same sort of content, but I just wanted to show you the structure. I did an online course and I wanted to keep samples of all the sort of different things I tried. It was a sort of mixed media thing. And so what I did, I've got this contraption that will put these ring binders in. You get it? So you buy the ring binders, and then this is called the cinch, and you sort of put it in here, and it's like, and then it depends on what size your rings are apart, and you just set it. It looks complicated, it really isn't. Basically it's a big sort of lever that presses these that you can buy quite easily into the page, and they're not that expensive if you think it's something you're going to use. And it does give you, it means you can do your work throughout the year, and then you can make it up into a book or more books at the end. And then if you don't want to go to that trouble, I've got this one, and this one I've made holes in it, and I've used these individual ring binders. So they work very much like, standard ring binders. You just pull them apart, but as you can see, they work individually, and they come in different sizes. This is the big one. And this is one I was doing some sampling of different transfer methods, and I wanted to have them all together. But so it's quite a sort of rough and ready one, but you can make this in a more, actually I think I've got another one. Now I can just think of it. I did a travel book all about the Netherlands and Cologne 2 years ago. And I did some of the artwork while I was away, and I collected collage pieces and I put them all together at the end, and you can see that I've done the same thing with the clips. So in this one I've used photographs, I've got ephemera, I've got all sorts of things, but I did take my jelly print with me and did some printing while I was away, which was fun. We went by car, so that makes it a bit easier to take art materials with you. So that's another way of using paper throughout your year or your season, or how you want to do it, and put it together at the end. And then other things I can show you. I've got, which one shall I talk about now? I wanted to talk about this one. This is what I'm going to be doing in my up and coming workshop at the Linnean Society. It's sold out, but I might be doing more. I'll let you know if I'm doing any more of those. That's in London. And this is using printing onto these square envelopes, which I really like because they fit exactly with the square of, there's a 6x6 inch gel plate that I like to use, and these fit perfectly. So what I've done with this is to document a lot of British native trees. I am going to be doing an in-depth video on this coming up after my workshop, so look out for that. And because I've been doing a lot of the foil images that you might have seen on my channel, what I really like with the envelopes is that you can make them into a book, but you've also got pockets where you can add other things. And this is put all attached onto what you call an accordion, because this all folds up. I think technically it's called an accordion flag book, because you've got, that's your accordion part, the spine, which is, you can see how that's made. It's quite straightforward. And then the flags are the individual pages. And because these envelopes are self-adhesive, I've managed to stick them in. I think one or two I needed to add some extra glue. So that's a really nice way. And you could do each season, perhaps, if you're following season, or a month. You could have like all your prints for a month, and then you can make it into an individual book like that. But it's a good idea to sort of think ahead what you're going to do it on. Then obviously if you decide halfway through, oh, I'd really like to do it on envelopes, it's a bit late by then. So think ahead, get your supplies, and then at the end you're going to have a more cohesive whole. On the other hand, you can use lots of different size pieces of paper, and that just gives you a different effect really. I think you see in this one, you know, I used a different size there, and actually it's quite fun, and you can have sort of fold out bits sometimes as well. So it's not, it's, you know, anything goes really, but if you want a more sort of cohesive look, perhaps think ahead about what you want to do. This one's another example of that, where I just used prints that I'd made onto paper, and then I stuck them onto card, and again put them into the accordion format. So that's the same as that one. This one, it was using a found book, and I did all sorts of different things, and that it wasn't particularly a theme, just it was more sort of colours. I think I wanted to keep it sort of monochrome, so there's a mixture of prints and actual plant material, which I always like to use, and then I did some sketching, which is quite relevant because I've just been doing some snowdrops, which I'll show you at the end. And that's another thing you can do. You can work into an old found book. You can often find them in secondhand bookshops. You can ask sometimes, because sometimes those sort of really tatty ones they send for pulping, but actually they're really good. And you can either use on the, you can either work on the pages that are already there, or you can just use the cover. The video in that series shows you how to do that. This was one I did actually work into a sketchbook. This is probably my oldest one here, and I have filled most of the pages. And this was more a sort of working in for ideas rather than a particular theme, because I do kind of mix and match quite a lot. But this is a way you can use sketches. This was a photograph that was printed onto tissue paper, and then I added in some, I always keep all the odds and ends. I have sort of folders of miscellaneous stuff, and I always liked, it's always nice, isn't it, to sort of juxtapose colours or textures and things, and sort of tearing the page gave it an interesting texture. And then some of these were prints, some of these were drawings. And then this is using the envelopes again, the square envelopes that I showed you with the leaf one. But what I've done here is that I've just used the leaves themselves sort of attached to each other. So these don't have a cover. And I've printed on these in a mixture of direct printing and jelly printing, and I think I did a few thermofaxes as well. But that's a really nice way. And what if you did do it like this, obviously you can just sort of keep going, because you haven't got, with the one with the cover, you've got a set number of pages, but here you could just make it as long as you wanted to. So that's quite a nice example. And then what else can I show you? Oh yeah, this was one I did. I started, see again, using a sketchbook, and I haven't filled in that many pages. I just wanted to depict tulips, but I thought that's quite a nice way to show you how you can use a photograph, especially if you're drawing, you're not very confident with your drawing. Is that as you can see, this was just a segment of a photograph of a beautiful tulip, and I've just finished it with a bit of pencil. And I think there were a couple of other, it's very unresolved. And again, this wasn't even a tulip, but I've painted round it, because you can paint straight onto photographs, and with a tulip shape, and then I've combined it with some printing as well. And yes, and then I did do, this is probably my most polished book, because I actually did a course where I at the Bodleian Library in Oxford last year, where I did proper letter setting and lino printing. But lino printing is a lovely way of doing your prints, and I'll probably talk a bit about that later in the year. But this was quite a formal way of doing a book. But it's similar because it's documenting, rather than sort of time, I've documented all my favourite tulips, and I've written a little bit about it. And honestly, I know it doesn't look like there's very much text, but it takes so long. It takes so long to set, because you have to set it upside down the wrong way round, and you think you've done okay, and then you do a test one and you realise you've got millions of you've used like different letters, you've used a U instead of an N, and then you have to, so it's quite a long process. So, and then we learned how to do a proper case binding as well, which is a lovely way to finish a book. So you could do that. With that, you need double page spreads because you're making them into sort of leaflets and then putting them into the book. But do let me know if you'd like me to show you how to do a case binding. It's one of those things where you have to be quite sort of precise because you use a lot of glue and you don't want to get glue on the cover. But it gives you a lovely, you know, real sort of professional finish, I think. And then, oh, this is a book that a lot of my ideas for my Glanville Fertility series. I've got an exhibition coming on that soon. So I've used actual, that was a plantain, and I did a print straight from the plant. So I'll be covering that later on in this series and incorporating drawings, photocopies of drawings, text, all sorts of things. You can just be really, I think it's a really fun sort of creative way of using lots of different methods. And then finally I'm going to show you this one. This was one of my, what I call my messy books, because what I do is that I decorate, I have big sheets of paper and I do lots of random printing, not thinking of any end product, and then I make the pages into books. And I've just added a couple of pieces of cardboard and I've covered them in other prints, but I haven't actually worked that much into it. You can see that I've done some, so this was drawing and painting when I was doing some irises, but this one, I quite like this because I had, I'd done a little sketch, a very sort of rough sketch of a vase with, I don't even know what's coming out of those, that might have been snowdrops. I didn't really love it, it was a bit rough and ready, and I thought, oh, if I put one of my, if I do a jelly print into it, look like the plants coming out of the vase. I don't know if that completely worked, but what's nice about this is that you've got the sort of shapes, again, like with the cutting garden book, you've got shapes to work with, and I just think it gives a nice sort of energy to your pages. So I think for my visual diary, I'm going to do a combination of doing things on separate bits of paper, but I'm also going to do some more work into some of the books I've already got, and then perhaps I'll have several more finished that I'll be able to complete by the end of the year. So I hope that's given you lots of ideas of ways that you can keep a visual diary. Please do ask any questions, and I said last time, and I must do that, I'm going to start a community post, and I'd really love to see what you're working on, plants, your garden, and you can tell me if you're inspired to give this a go. So see you soon.